Right before we dive in, let's make this story bigger than just me and you. Tell me in the comments, what part of the world are you watching from, and what's the clock striking there? Morning, night, or somewhere in between, I want to see how far this story can reach. Now, lean closer. Here's where it all begins. The bullet tore through Baptiste Durand's shoulder like liquid fire, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the dust outside Rattlesnake Ridge's only bank. Blood bloomed across his faded work shirt as he tried to crawl toward cover, his 23-year-old body already failing him after years of back-breaking labor and too little food. The Viper Creek gang stood over him like vultures. Their leader, Jake Sidewinder Morrison, grinning as he cocked his smoking Colt for the killing shot. "Should have minded your own business, farm boy," Sidewinder drawled, his voice carrying the lazy cruelty of a man who enjoyed watching others suffer. "Nobody asked you to play hero when we were making our withdrawal from the bank." Behind him, his three companions laughed at their leader's joke, their faces hidden behind bandanas, but their eyes gleaming with the anticipation of violence. They had robbed the bank clean and killed the elderly teller, and now this young cowboy who had tried to stop them would join the old man in death. That's when she appeared, a figure in black riding hard down the main street, her horse's hooves thundering against the packed earth like war drums. The woman sat her saddle with the easy grace of someone born to ride, her long dark hair streaming behind her like a battle flag. She wore men's clothes, black pants, black shirt, black hat, but there was nothing masculine about the way she moved or the fierce determination that radiated from her like heat from a forge. Without slowing her mount, she drew a rifle from her saddle scabbard with fluid precision and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck with impossible accuracy. One shattered Sidewinder's gun hand, another took his second-in-command through the shoulder, and the third sent the youngest gang member's weapons spinning away into the dust. The woman's horse skidded to a stop between the wounded cowboy and his would-be killers, her rifle already tracking toward the 4th outlaw who was fumbling for his iron. "Next shot goes through your heart instead of around it," she called out, her voice carrying the musical accent of French Louisiana, but hardened by years of frontier life. Her eyes, dark as midnight storms, never wavered from their targets as she controlled her dancing horse with nothing but her knees. "Your choice, boys. Ride out bleeding or stay here bleeding worse." The Viper Creek gang had never retreated from a fight in their lives, but looking into those merciless eyes, they suddenly discovered what fear tasted like. Baptiste struggled to focus through the haze of pain and blood loss, hardly believing what his eyes were telling him. The mysterious woman in black dismounted with cat-like grace, her rifle never wavering from the outlaws who were slowly backing toward their horses. She was perhaps 25 years old, with features that spoke of mixed heritage, the high cheekbones of French aristocracy blended with something wilder, more dangerous. Her hands were steady as stone despite the violence she had just unleashed. "Mademoiselle, you don't know what you're getting into," Sidewinder gasped, clutching his shattered hand to his chest while blood seeped between his fingers. "We're the Viper Creek gang. We've killed men for less than what you just did." His bravado was paper-thin, undermined by the pain and the growing realization that this woman was unlike anyone he had ever faced. She moved with the confidence of someone who had danced with death many times and never missed a step. The woman's response was a smile that held no warmth, only the promise of consequences that would make their current wounds seem gentle. "I know exactly who you are, Jake Morrison," she said, using Sidewinder's real name with casual familiarity that made his blood run cold. "I know you murdered that family outside El Paso last month, and I know about the stagecoach you robbed near Tucson. What you don't know is who I am, and trust me, you don't want to find out." Baptiste watched in amazement as the 4 hardened killers actually began mounting their horses, their movements quick and nervous like rabbits sensing a wolf nearby. Whatever this woman represented, it was something that scared men who made their living through violence and intimidation. As they prepared to ride out, Sidewinder turned back for one last threat, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "This ain't over, lady," he snarled, his ruined hand dripping blood onto his saddle horn. "We'll find out who you are, and when we do, we'll come back and finish what we started here." But even as he spoke the words, his eyes couldn't quite meet hers, and his horse pranced nervously beneath him as if sensing its rider's fear. The woman said nothing in response, just watched them with those dark storm eyes until they disappeared in a cloud of dust and cowardice. The woman knelt beside Baptiste with movements that spoke of experience treating gunshot wounds, her hands gentle but sure as she examined his shoulder. "The bullet went clean through," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "You're lucky, missed the bone and the major blood vessels. You'll live, but you need proper doctoring." Her touch was surprisingly tender for someone who had just driven off 4 killers with nothing but threats and rifle fire. Baptiste tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through his shoulder like red-hot iron. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me?" The question seemed inadequate for what had just happened, but shock and blood loss were making it hard to think clearly. This mysterious woman had appeared like an avenging angel and saved his life without knowing anything about him beyond the fact that he was in trouble. "Call me Evangeline," she replied, helping him to his feet with surprising strength. "As for why I helped you, let's just say I don't like seeing innocent people get hurt by men who think their guns make them gods." She whistled sharply, and her horse trotted over like a well-trained dog, nuzzling her shoulder with obvious affection. The animal was a magnificent black stallion, built for speed and endurance, with intelligence in its dark eyes that matched its owner's. Baptiste swayed on his feet, the world spinning around him like a child's top as shock began setting in. Evangeline caught his good arm and steadied him, her grip strong and reassuring. "There's a doctor in this town?" she asked, scanning the collection of weathered buildings that made up Rattlesnake Ridge. The settlement was typical of frontier boom towns, hastily built, poorly planned, and populated by people who had come west to escape their pasts or find their fortunes. "Doc Thibodeau," Baptiste mumbled, pointing toward a small adobe building at the end of the street. "He's good with bullet wounds, gets plenty of practice in a place like this." As they began walking slowly toward the doctor's office, Baptiste couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important about his mysterious savior. The way she had used Sidewinder's real name, the confidence with which she had faced down 4 armed killers, the fear he had seen in those hardened outlaws' eyes, it all pointed to secrets that ran deeper than simple frontier kindness. Dr. Thibodeau was a small, nervous man who had come west to escape gambling debts back in New Orleans, but his hands were steady when it came to surgery and his medical knowledge was sound. He took one look at Baptiste's shoulder and nodded grimly, already reaching for his instruments. "Another shooting, I see," he muttered in accented English. "This town goes through more lead than a mining operation." His eyes flickered to Evangeline with curious interest, noting details that Baptiste's pain-clouded vision had missed. As the doctor worked on cleaning and stitching the wound, Baptiste gritted his teeth against the pain and tried to focus on something other than the needle piercing his flesh. Evangeline stood by the window, her rifle still in her hands and her eyes scanning the street like a sentinel watching for trouble. There was something almost military in her bearing, a readiness that spoke of years spent expecting violence at any moment. "You did good work out there," Dr. Thibodeau said quietly to Evangeline, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen enough frontier violence to recognize professional skill when he witnessed it. 3 shots, 3 hits, all non-fatal but disabling. That takes considerable talent with a rifle. He paused in his stitching to study her face more carefully, his expression growing thoughtful and slightly troubled. Evangeline's response was a slight nod that acknowledged the compliment without encouraging further conversation. "Will he be all right?" she asked, deflecting attention away from her own actions and back to the patient. "He lost a fair amount of blood, and shock can be dangerous if it's not treated properly." Her concern seemed genuine, which made Baptiste wonder again why she had risked her life for a complete stranger. Dr. Thibodeau finished his work and began bandaging the wound with practiced efficiency. "He'll heal fine with proper rest and care," he assured them both. The bullet did remarkably little damage for something fired at such close range. He secured the bandage with tape and stepped back to admire his handiwork, but his eyes kept returning to Evangeline with an expression that suggested growing recognition mixed with disbelief. Baptiste dozed fitfully as the laudanum Dr. Thibodeau had given him for pain began taking effect, his consciousness drifting in and out like a boat on gentle waves. Through the haze of medication and exhaustion, he could hear Evangeline and the doctor speaking in low voices near the window, their words floating past him like half-remembered dreams. Something in their tone suggested they were discussing more than just his medical care. "I thought you looked familiar," Dr. Thibodeau was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I told myself it couldn't be possible. You're supposed to be dead, killed in that ambush outside Austin 3 years ago. The newspapers were full of the story." There was awe in his voice now, mixed with the kind of fear that comes from standing next to a legend that has suddenly become flesh and blood. Evangeline's response was so quiet that Baptiste had to strain to hear it, fighting against the laudanum's pull toward unconsciousness. "Stories of my death were greatly exaggerated," she said with what might have been dark humor. "Though there are times I wish they weren't." The pain in her voice was subtle but unmistakable, suggesting wounds that went far deeper than anything a doctor could stitch closed. Baptiste forced his eyes open, curiosity overcoming the drug's embrace as he tried to understand what he was hearing. "Who is she, Doc?" he mumbled, his words slurred but determined. "What aren't you telling me?" The conversation had taken on an urgency that cut through his chemical haze, warning him that he had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple bank robbery. Dr. Thibodeau and Evangeline exchanged a long look that seemed to communicate volumes without words. Finally, the doctor spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. "Son, the woman who saved your life is Evangeline L'Ange Noir Broussard, the Black Angel. She's the most feared bounty hunter in the entire American frontier, and according to every wanted poster west of the Mississippi, she died 3 years ago in a hail of bullets." The words hung in the air like gun smoke, transforming everything Baptiste thought he knew about his mysterious savior. The name hit Baptiste like a physical blow, cutting through the laudanum fog with the clarity of ice water. L'Ange Noir, the Black Angel, was a legend whispered around campfires and in saloons across the frontier. Stories said she had tracked down over 50 wanted men, bringing them in alive when possible, but dead when necessary. She was the hunter that other hunters feared, the one bounty killers warned their children about in bedtime stories meant to teach respect for the law. "But you're supposed to be dead," Baptiste whispered, his voice filled with the wonder of a man meeting a ghost. "The Caldwell gang ambushed you outside Austin. 50 men with rifles and dynamite. Nobody could have survived that." He struggled to reconcile the gentle woman who had bandaged his wounds with the legendary figure whose exploits had become frontier mythology. Evangeline turned from the window, her dark eyes holding depths of pain that spoke of losses too great for words. 50 men tried to kill me," she said simply. 47 of them succeeded in killing someone, just not me. They killed my partner, my horse, and the man I loved more than life itself. I walked away from that canyon carrying their bodies, and Evangeline Broussard died that day along with them. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of tragedy and transformation. Baptiste could see now why the Viper Creek gang had fled rather than face her. L'Ange Noir wasn't just a bounty hunter. She was a force of nature wrapped in human flesh, tempered by loss into something harder than steel. The woman who had saved him wasn't just dangerous. She was death incarnate for anyone who crossed the line between law and chaos. Dr. Thibodeau cleared his throat nervously, breaking the spell that had settled over the room like a shroud. "If you're still alive, that changes everything," he said carefully. "There are people who have built their reputations on claiming they killed you. Men who've made fortunes selling that story to anyone who'd listen. If word gets out that you're back..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications of a legend returning from the dead. Evangeline moved away from the window with the fluid grace of a hunting cat, her boots silent on the wooden floor as she began pacing the small room. "That's exactly why the world thinks I'm dead," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of carefully maintained deception. "It's easier to work when people aren't expecting you, when they think they're safe from judgment." Her hand rested unconsciously on her gun butt as she spoke, a gesture so natural it seemed involuntary. Baptiste watched her move, noting details he had missed before. The way she unconsciously checked every corner of the room, how her eyes never stopped scanning for threats, the subtle positioning that kept her within quick reach of both weapon and exit. This wasn't just caution. It was the hyper-vigilance of someone who had survived by never letting down her guard. "What changed?" he asked softly. "Why reveal yourself now?" "Because innocent people were about to die," Evangeline replied without hesitation. "I've spent 3 years hunting in the shadows, taking down the worst of the worst while everyone thought I was safely buried. But when I saw those animals about to execute you in the street..." She paused, her jaw tightening with remembered anger. "Some lines can't be crossed, even if it means exposing myself." Dr. Thibodeau was nervously organizing his medical instruments, his hands shaking slightly as the full implications of the situation settled over him. "The Viper Creek gang won't just let this go," he said quietly. "They'll spread word that L'Ange Noir is alive, and every gun-crazy fool in the territory will come looking to make their reputation by killing a legend. This town will become a battleground." Evangeline stopped pacing and fixed the doctor with a stare that could have melted iron. "Then maybe it's time for some of these gun-crazy fools to learn what legends are really made of," she said, her voice carrying the promise of storms and lightning. "I've been hiding long enough. If they want to dance with death, L'Ange Noir is ready to lead the waltz." The transformation was complete. The gentle woman who had tended Baptiste's wounds was gone, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. Word spread through Rattlesnake Ridge faster than wildfire through dry grass, carried by the Viper Creek gang's retreat and the excited whispers of witnesses who had seen the impossible. L'Ange Noir was alive, walking among them like a ghost made flesh, and the implications sent shockwaves through every saloon, general store, and gambling den in the territory. By sunset, telegraph wires were humming with messages that would reshape the balance of power across the entire frontier. Baptiste insisted on staying conscious despite Dr. Thibodeau's protests, the laudanum wearing off enough to let him think clearly about what was coming. "You should leave," he told Evangeline as she checked her weapons with methodical precision. "This isn't your fight anymore. You saved my life, and that's enough. Don't throw away 3 years of careful hiding for a nobody like me." The words cost him. But he couldn't bear the thought of this remarkable woman dying because of his problems. Evangeline looked up from cleaning her rifle, her dark eyes holding a mixture of amusement and steel. "You think I saved you because I'm some kind of saint?" she asked, her voice carrying gentle mockery. "I saved you because watching bullies win makes me sick to my stomach. And now that they know I'm alive, running would just mean fighting this battle somewhere else against different odds." She slid a cartridge into the rifle's chamber with a sound like doom closing. Through the window, they could see riders approaching from 3 different directions. Lone gunfighters and small groups of bounty hunters drawn by the promise of fame and fortune that came with killing a legend. The stakes had changed from a simple bank robbery to something far more primal. The old guard versus the new, order versus chaos, with L'Ange Noir standing as judge and executioner over them all. Dr. Thibodeau extinguished most of the lamps, plunging the room into shadows that would make it harder for snipers to find targets. "There's a back way out," he offered quietly. "Through the surgery and into the alley behind the general store. You could be gone before they know which building you're in." But even as he spoke, they could all hear the sound of boots surrounding the building, cutting off escape routes with professional efficiency. The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and smoke as 3 men burst through in a coordinated assault. They were professionals, faces hard as desert stone, guns drawn and ready, moving with the fluid coordination of men who had done this many times before. The leader was a tall, lean figure in a black coat, his pale eyes scanning the room with predatory intensity as his companions spread out to flank their targets. "Evening, L'Ange Noir," the man said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of education mixed with years of frontier violence. "Name's Corbeau. Matthias Corbeau. I've been hunting you for 3 years, following rumors and ghost stories across half the continent. You can't imagine how pleased I am to finally meet you in person." His smile was all teeth and no warmth, the expression of a shark sensing blood in the water. Evangeline had positioned herself behind Dr. Thibodeau's heavy wooden desk, using its bulk for cover while keeping clear lines of fire to all 3 intruders. "Matthias Corbeau," she said, her voice carrying recognition and contempt in equal measure. "The man who claims he killed me outside Austin. How's that story been working out for you? Made you rich? Made you famous?" Her rifle tracked smoothly between targets, ready to deal death with mechanical precision. Baptiste pressed himself against the wall, his wounded shoulder screaming protest as he tried to stay out of the line of fire. From his position, he could see more shapes moving outside the windows. This wasn't just 3 men. It was a coordinated attack by what looked like a small army. Corbeau had brought enough firepower to level the building if necessary, turning the doctor's office into a killing ground with no mercy for innocent bystanders. "Rich, famous, and respected," Corbeau confirmed, his gun hand steady as carved stone. "But there's always been this nagging doubt in the back of my mind. What if someone figured out the truth? What if the real L'Ange Noir showed up to spoil my story?" His eyes glittered with malice and anticipation. "Well, now I get to kill you twice. Once for the money, and once for the satisfaction of knowing my secret dies with you." The gunfight erupted with thunderous violence that shook the entire building, muzzle flashes lighting the room like deadly fireworks. Evangeline moved with inhuman speed, rolling across the floor as bullets splintered the desk where she had been hiding. Her rifle spoke twice in rapid succession, and 2 of Corbeau's men dropped with screams of pain and surprise, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. Corbeau himself proved why he had survived long enough to steal her reputation, diving for cover behind an overturned examination table while returning fire with practiced accuracy. His bullets chewed splinters from the wall inches from Evangeline's head, forcing her to keep moving in a deadly dance that left no room for error. "You're good," he called out over the gunfire, "but you're outnumbered 20 to 1. My men have this building surrounded." Baptiste watched in amazement as Evangeline seemed to flow like liquid shadow through the chaos, using every piece of furniture and architectural feature as cover while never losing track of her targets. She fired through the window at shapes moving outside, her shots rewarded with screams and curses that suggested she was finding her marks. This wasn't just marksmanship, it was artistry painted in gunpowder and blood. Dr. Thibodeau had taken shelter behind his medicine cabinet, but his position gave him a clear view of the street outside. "She's right about the numbers," he called out to Baptiste over the gunfire. "I count at least 15 men out there, maybe more. They've got the place surrounded tighter than a tick on a hound dog." His voice carried the resigned tone of a man who had seen too much frontier violence to harbor illusions about their chances. As if to punctuate his words, more gunfire erupted from outside as Corbeau's reinforcements began firing through the windows, turning the doctor's office into a shooting gallery where they were the targets. Glass exploded inward in deadly showers, and bullets chewed through the wooden walls like hungry termites. It was clear that Corbeau had no intention of taking prisoners. This was an execution disguised as a gunfight. Evangeline dropped to one knee behind the ruins of Dr. Thibodeau's desk and did something that defied all logic. She stopped shooting and began listening with the intense concentration of a musician hearing a symphony. The gunfire outside continued its deadly rhythm, but she seemed to be parsing individual sounds from the chaos, tracking each shooter's position by the distinctive sound of their weapons. "You're finished, L'Ange Noir!" Corbeau shouted from his hiding place, his voice cracking with the strain of combat and adrenaline. "Surrender now, and I'll make it quick. One bullet to the head instead of letting my boys take their time with you." His bravado was undermined by the sweat pouring down his face and the tremor in his gun hand that spoke of nerves stretched to the breaking point. Baptiste saw Evangeline's expression change as she finished her acoustic calculation, her face settling into the cold mask of absolute focus that he was beginning to recognize as her killing face. She raised her rifle with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed, the barrel tracking toward something only she could see. "Time for a lesson in reputation versus reality," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. The shot she fired seemed impossible. A bullet that traveled through the shattered window, across the street, and into the second-story window of the hotel where a sniper had been methodically shooting at their position. The sudden silence from that direction was followed by a crash as the hidden shooter's body hit the floor, and the psychological effect on the other attackers was immediate and devastating. Corbeau's face went pale as he realized what had just happened. "She can't see that position from here," he muttered to himself, but his words carried clearly in the sudden lull of gunfire. "It's impossible. The angle's all wrong. The distance is too far." But the evidence of L'Ange Noir's supernatural marksmanship was unmistakable, and for the first time since the fight began, doubt crept into his voice. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical violence. Word of the impossible shot spread among Corbeau's men like plague through a crowded ship, undermining their confidence and making them question what they were really facing. These were hardened killers who had made their living through violence, but they had signed on to ambush a woman, not to face down a supernatural force that could kill with mystical precision. Baptiste watched Evangeline transform before his eyes from the gentle woman who had saved his life into something harder and more terrible, a force of nature wearing human form, calculating trajectories and consequences with mechanical precision. Her next 3 shots came in rapid succession, each one finding targets that should have been impossible to hit from her position, each one causing another of Corbeau's men to flee into the night. "This is what legends are made of," Dr. Thibodeau whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. "Not the stories they tell in saloons, but this, the moment when reality becomes myth, when skill transcends human limitations." He was watching history being written in gunpowder and blood, witnessing the birth of legends that would be told for generations. Corbeau's remaining men began falling back from their positions, their nerve finally breaking under the relentless pressure of facing an opponent who seemed to know where they were before they knew it themselves. Shouts of, "She's got eyes like a hawk," and "No human can shoot like that," echoed through the night air as professional killers discovered the difference between reputation and reality. Evangeline stood slowly from her position behind the ruined desk, her rifle still smoking in her hands and her dark eyes reflecting the muzzle flashes like obsidian mirrors. When she spoke, her voice carried across the battlefield with the authority of divine judgment. "I am L'Ange Noir," she called out, each word precisely enunciated and heavy with promise. I am death walking among you, and I have come to collect what is owed." The declaration sent a visible shudder through the remaining attackers, and suddenly the night filled with the sound of retreat. Corbeau found himself alone in the wreckage of Dr. Thibodeau's office, his grand ambush reduced to rubble, and his army of hired guns scattered to the wind like leaves before a storm. The man who had built his reputation on claiming to have killed L'Ange Noir now faced the terrible reality of her presence, and the weight of his deception pressed down on him like a mountain of guilt and fear. "Just you and me now, Matthias," Evangeline said, her voice carrying the quiet menace of a judge pronouncing sentence. "The man who stole my death and sold it for fame and fortune. How does it feel to face the ghost you created?" She moved toward him with predatory grace, her rifle held ready but not quite aimed, giving him the chance to surrender or die with whatever dignity he could muster. Corbeau's hands shook as he raised his gun, his carefully cultivated confidence crumbling like a house built on sand. "You should be dead," he whispered, his voice breaking with the strain of facing his own lies made manifest. "I saw the canyon where they ambushed you. Nobody could have survived that slaughter. Nobody human, anyway." The implication hung in the air like smoke, suggesting that he was facing something beyond mortal comprehension. Baptiste struggled to his feet despite his wounded shoulder, driven by a need to witness the confrontation between legend and pretender. From his position against the wall, he could see the stark difference between the two figures. Corbeau, sweating and desperate, his reputation built on borrowed glory, and Evangeline, calm as winter frost, her every movement speaking of earned authority and hard-won skill. "I survived because I had something to live for," Evangeline replied, her voice carrying undertones of pain that spoke of losses too deep for casual understanding. "I survived because someone had to pay for what was taken from me in that canyon. And I survived because cowards like you don't get to profit from other people's deaths without consequences." The words fell like hammer blows, each one driving another nail into the coffin of Corbeau's stolen reputation. The standoff stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Corbeau's gun wavered in his grip as he tried to find the courage to fire, but facing the real L'Ange Noir was nothing like shooting her in the back from ambush. This was the woman whose reputation had been built on fair fights and impossible shots, whose legend had grown from genuine skill rather than manufactured lies. "Tell me about Austin," Evangeline demanded, her rifle now aimed directly at Corbeau's heart. "Tell me about the canyon where you claim to have killed me. Tell me about the 50 men who were supposed to finish what they started." Her voice carried the weight of personal pain mixed with professional interest, as if she were conducting an investigation that would determine his fate. Corbeau's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the coward beneath the carefully constructed persona. "I wasn't even there," he screamed, his voice breaking with the strain of maintaining 3 years' worth of lies. "I found the bodies afterward, heard the stories from survivors. When they said L'Ange Noir was dead, I saw an opportunity." The confession poured out of him like poison from a lanced wound. Baptiste felt sick as the implications of Corbeau's words sank in. This man had built his entire reputation on scavenging the remains of someone else's tragedy, profiting from death and loss while the real hero struggled to survive. It was a betrayal that went beyond simple fraud. It was theft of the deepest, most personal kind. "You took their story," Evangeline said, her voice now carrying the cold fury of absolute judgment. "You took the deaths of good men and women and turned them into profit margins. You wore their sacrifice like a costume and danced on their graves for money." The rifle in her hands had become an instrument of divine retribution, promising consequences that would balance scales 3 years in the making. Corbeau dropped to his knees, his gun falling from nerveless fingers as the full weight of his situation crushed down on him like an avalanche. "Please," he begged, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'll give back the money, confess to everything." Tell the world the truth about what I did. Just don't kill me. I'm not worth the bullet it would take." The proud gunfighter who had terrorized the frontier was reduced to a sniveling coward facing the consequences of his choices. Evangeline studied him with the dispassionate interest of a scientist examining a particularly unpleasant specimen. "You're right," she said finally, lowering her rifle slightly. "You're not worth the bullet. But the people you've hurt, the families who never got justice for their loved ones, they're worth something. And that's what this is really about." Her words carried the weight of years spent hunting in shadows, seeking balance in a world that seemed determined to reward cruelty. Baptiste watched in fascination as Evangeline began moving around the room, gathering evidence of the night's violence with methodical precision. She collected empty cartridges, examined bullet holes, and made mental notes that suggested she was building a case rather than simply savoring victory. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice in its purest form. "The territorial marshal will be very interested in your confession," Evangeline continued, her voice taking on the businesslike tone of someone conducting official business. "Especially when he learns about the families you've terrorized while wearing a dead woman's reputation. Fraud, murder, extortion. You've built quite a resume for yourself, Matthias." The casual way she discussed his crimes made them seem even more damning. Dr. Thibodeau emerged from his hiding place behind the medicine cabinet, his face pale but determined as he began assessing the damage to his office. "I'll testify to everything I've seen here tonight," he said firmly. "The attack, the confession, all of it. That man has been spreading poison in this territory for too long." His medical oath to do no harm didn't extend to protecting criminals who profited from others' suffering. As dawn broke over Rattlesnake Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the violence of the previous night, Evangeline made a decision that would reshape the legend of L'Ange Noir forever. She walked to the window and looked out at the town that was slowly coming alive, its citizens emerging to survey the damage and count the cost of hosting a legend's return from the dead. "The world needs to know the truth," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of careful consideration. Not just about Corbeau, but about everything. The ambush, the survivors, the real story of what happened in that canyon outside Austin. The decision was clearly painful, but her expression showed the resolve of someone who had finally found peace with a difficult choice. Baptiste struggled to understand the implications of what she was saying. "You're going to reveal yourself completely, give up the advantage of being thought dead?" The strategic cost seemed enormous. 3 years of careful positioning thrown away for the sake of setting the record straight. Evangeline turned from the window with a smile that held genuine warmth for the first time since he had met her. "Sometimes hiding becomes its own kind of prison," she explained. "I've spent 3 years hunting in shadows, and while it's been effective, it's also been lonely. Maybe it's time for L'Ange Noir to walk in the daylight again, to be a symbol people can see rather than a ghost they only hear about." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention back to the window, where a group of riders was approaching under the banner of territorial authority. Marshal Claude Beauregard led the contingent, his weathered face grim with the knowledge that something significant had happened in his jurisdiction. Behind him rode deputies and federal agents, enough firepower to handle whatever they might find in Rattlesnake Ridge. Corbeau whimpered as he recognized the marshal's colors, understanding that his confession to L'Ange Noir was about to become official testimony that would seal his fate. "They'll hang me," he whispered, his voice filled with the terror of a man facing inevitable justice. "Everything I've done, all the people I've hurt while pretending to be you, they'll stretch my neck for sure." Marshal Beauregard entered Dr. Thibodeau's office like a man walking into a cathedral, his eyes taking in the bullet holes and blood stains with the professional interest of someone who had investigated countless scenes of violence. Behind him, his deputies spread out in a formation that suggested they were prepared for continued resistance, their hands resting casually on their weapons while their eyes searched for threats. "Well, I'll be damned," the marshal said softly, his gaze settling on Evangeline with a mixture of recognition and wonder. L'Ange Noir herself, alive and well after all these years. "Ma'am, you've been sorely missed in this territory. Things have gotten considerably worse since word of your death reached us." His tone carried genuine respect mixed with the relief of a lawman who had just received unexpected reinforcement. Evangeline inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement of the greeting, but her attention remained focused on Corbeau, who was trying unsuccessfully to blend into the wall behind him. "Marshal Beauregard," she said formally, "I believe you'll find this man's testimony very illuminating regarding a number of unsolved cases in your jurisdiction. He's been quite talkative about his activities over the past 3 years." Baptiste watched the interplay between legend and law with fascination, noting how the marshal's deputies unconsciously deferred to Evangeline's presence even though she held no official authority. Her reputation preceded her like a force of nature, commanding respect from men who made their living bringing order to chaos. She was more than a bounty hunter. She was an institution. Corbeau tried one last desperate gambit, pointing at Evangeline with a shaking finger. "She's an outlaw!" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She just murdered 15 men in cold blood. Arrest her, not me!" But his words fell on deaf ears. Everyone in the room had witnessed his confession and understood exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. Marshal Beauregard's response was a laugh that held no humor, only contempt for a man trying to escape justice through lies and misdirection. "Son, L'Ange Noir has more legal authority in this territory than half my deputies. She's a federal marshal's special agent, appointed by the territorial governor himself. Everything she's done here tonight was completely legal and absolutely necessary." The revelation hit Corbeau like a physical blow, draining the last of his false hope. The formal arrest of Matthias Corbeau proceeded with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Marshal Beauregard's men securing the prisoner while documenting evidence and taking statements from witnesses. Baptiste found himself thrust into the role of key witness, his account of the evening's events providing crucial context for the official record. Dr. Thibodeau added his own testimony with the precision of a trained observer, leaving no doubt about Corbeau's guilt. As the deputies led Corbeau away in chains, the broken man turned back for one last look at Evangeline. "This won't end it," he said, his voice carrying the desperate hope of someone clinging to delusion. "There are others who've built their reputations on your death. They'll come for you, all of them, because you represent everything they're afraid of becoming." The warning was probably true, but it no longer carried any sting. Evangeline watched the prisoner disappear into the custody wagon, with the satisfaction of someone who had finally balanced a long overdue account. "Let them come," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the morning air with absolute confidence. "I'm tired of hiding from shadows when I could be casting them instead. The real L'Ange Noir is back, and anyone who wants to challenge that claim is welcome to try." Marshal Beauregard approached her with something that looked like a badge, its metal surface gleaming in the morning sun. "The territorial governor asked me to give you this if you ever surfaced again," he said formally. "It's official appointment as special federal marshal with full authority to pursue criminals across territorial boundaries. The pay's not much, but the authority is absolute." The offer represented everything she had walked away from 3 years ago. Baptiste watched as Evangeline stared at the badge for a long moment, weighing the implications of accepting official status after years of operating in the shadows. Finally, she reached out and took the metal star, pinning it to her black shirt with movements that seemed to carry ritual significance. "Looks like L'Ange Noir is back in business," she said with a smile that promised stormy weather for outlaws across the frontier. The town of Rattlesnake Ridge buzzed with excitement as word spread that L'Ange Noir had not only returned from the dead, but had officially resumed her legendary career. Citizens who had cowered in their homes during the gunfight now emerged to catch glimpses of the woman whose reputation had shaped frontier justice for over a decade. Children peered around their mothers' skirts while adults whispered stories that had already begun growing in the telling. Baptiste's shoulder was healing well under Dr. Thibodeau's care, but his real recovery came from watching Evangeline emerge from the shadows of the past 3 years. The woman who had hidden behind death was transforming back into the legend she had always been, but with a depth and humanity that the stories had never captured. She was still dangerous, still capable of impossible things, but now she was also approachable in a way that made her more rather than less intimidating. "What will you do now?" Baptiste asked as they stood on the hotel's front porch, watching the sun climb higher into the desert sky. His question carried genuine curiosity, mixed with the hope that their paths might continue to cross in the future. The young cowboy had been transformed by his encounter with living legend, and he was reluctant to return to the ordinary world where heroes existed only in stories. Evangeline adjusted her new badge with the careful attention of someone taking on a sacred responsibility. "I'll do what I've always done," she replied. "Hunt down the people who prey on the innocent, bring justice to places where law can't reach, and make sure that the stories they tell about L'Ange Noir are worth telling." Her voice carried the promise of adventures yet to come. Marshal Beauregard approached with a leather portfolio filled with wanted posters and territorial reports. "If you're serious about resuming active duty, I've got enough work to keep you busy for the next 5 years," he said, with the grateful tone of a man whose burden had just been dramatically lightened. "The frontier's gotten wilder since you've been gone, and we need someone with your particular talents to remind folks that actions have consequences." 3 months later, stories of L'Ange Noir's return had spread across the entire frontier like wildfire through dry grass. Tales of her impossible marksmanship and unwavering pursuit of justice had taken on the quality of modern myth, inspiring some and terrifying others in equal measure. The woman who had died in an ambush outside Austin had been reborn as something greater. Not just a bounty hunter, but a symbol of hope for those who had lost faith in justice. Baptiste had recovered completely from his wounds and found himself appointed as L'Ange Noir's official assistant, a position that combined clerk, witness, and occasional backup gun into a role perfectly suited to his talents and limitations. His damaged leg no longer seemed like a disability when he was working alongside a woman who had turned her own limitations into strengths. Together, they had become a force that brought order to chaos across the American frontier. The letter that arrived that morning bore the official seal of the territorial governor, but its contents were personal in a way that transcended bureaucracy. "Dear Miss Broussard," it read, "word of your return has reached the highest levels of government, and I am instructed to convey the gratitude of a nation for your continued service to justice and order. You have become more than a law officer. You have become an inspiration to all who believe that right must triumph over might." Evangeline read the letter while standing in the same spot where she had first revealed herself to save Baptiste's life, the place where L'Ange Noir had officially returned from the dead. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had tried to disappear into anonymity and found herself more famous than ever. But fame built on truth was different from reputation stolen through lies, and she had learned to carry the weight of legend with grace and purpose. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the badge on her chest, Evangeline mounted her black stallion and prepared to ride toward whatever adventure awaited beyond the horizon. Baptiste rode beside her, no longer the frightened young cowboy who had tried to stop a bank robbery, but a confident partner in the pursuit of justice. Behind them, the lights of Rattlesnake Ridge twinkled like earthbound stars, marking the place where legends were not just born, but reborn. The call sign that had once made gunslingers break their silence in fear now carried a different message: that justice might be delayed but would never be denied, that heroes could rise from their own ashes, and that sometimes the greatest legends were not the ones who died young, but the ones who chose to live long enough to make their stories worth telling. L'Ange Noir rode toward the future with purpose renewed and reputation restored, ready to write new chapters in a legend that would outlive them all.